They really are, you can see that soil still quite, I haven't used that scrim tape for a long time. The problem with the scrim tape is it's really easy to use, but the drainage is too fine. You don't want anything in your drainage line it's finer than that. That's the smallest drainage hole you want in the bottom of your pot. If you look at some of the Japanese, it's probably a third bigger than that. This I get from Hobbycraft. It's for the kids to do needlecraft stuff on.
Cross stitches.
That sort of thing. It's about £1 a sheet. You can go to Bonsai store and pay £5 a sheet, but that's from Hobbycraft and that sort of store. At home I'd be using a water hose to do this, which is a bit softer. And you just take the jet and just wash it out and use a chopstick to move the... You can see how the roots are quite... That's a thick root on Azalea, that one. You've got to be, if you're going to do this, you're quite aggressive at this point. This will go into a shelter when it gets home, just to keep the wind off of it, because it's going to take 2 or 3 weeks for the roots to re-establish.
How much of the root will you cut off?
I won't actually cut any root on this. It'll just by reducing the soil. I'm taking out root there. I'm not actually. I will cut a little bit to tidy it up when I finish, but I'm not going to prune the roots like you would on a maple, where you'd be cutting out all the big roots. They're just not on this tree. I mean, literally, that is a thick root, and there's not that many of those.
Is that because you've taken the thick ones out in previous?
No, it's just the habit of the tree. They just seem to have this wild root system. They don't seem to have the secondary and the tap roots that you have on a... What you have to do is miss your hand when you're doing this. It hurts.
Give your wife the
Hey? You know how that works, Mark.
Really well.
What I'm trying to do is make sure I've got all the old soil out of it. And that's fairly unusual in trees. Maples you wouldn't do this to, not very often.
So the canola starts off white. How long does it take to go black?
20 years.
The canola is still white. It's orange when it's wet. That's the orange is just wet. The black is root. The reason the one I repotted was black was there was some rot in it that had just started, so we repotted it just at the right point. The black in here is all root, if you see.
Yeah.
All I've done is, there's not much soil left, as you can see. It's all been... having said I'm not going to cut much off. I need to sit it more like that in the pot, so that a bit more at the front has to come off to, because it was like that in the pot originally. So I've had to take off that bit of root. Well, that bit of root wasn't supporting very much tree anyway, so what I'm going to do is repot it up there, and we will start to move some of these branches to form a new crown around here. I'm not going to move them now because they're fairly brittle at the moment.
So is this side of the tree pointing towards me is dead, is it?
Yeah.
Would you plant it?
I will eventually, not I'll let the tree re-establish roots. But it was like that. It can go back in like that. And it wants to go further back in the pot than I'm going to be able to do tonight. It wants to go back there. But I'm going to have to put it in like that at the moment. And then we'll repot it in a couple of years' time earlier. And we'll move some of the roots off the back and move it back to where it wants to be. I can't do it all in one hit, or have a variety tree called dead again. They're very common sometimes. It's sad, but it's probably the only way we learn with bonsai is we kill some. If you've not killed a tree, you've not learned yet.
Almost know what.
So if you're a bonsai murderer, you're getting there. Because what we're doing to it is not natural, is it? And I always used to like it when they come up to me when we were doing shows and they'd say to me, you're cruel, you're hurting that tree.
Oh yeah.
I used to love those conversations. Yeah. Why am I cruel? Oh, you're cutting it. Well, when did you cut your lawn? All those poor grass plants that you cut down. And do you have cut flowered in your house? Oh yeah, they're pretty. Oh, you think of all those plants you've... Oh, you nasty person.
Showing these balls, I get the gist that the whole aim is to get them in flower. That's what you're aiming at, is to have it showing in flower, yeah?
Generally, I mean, I like... I think I could show most of those in or out of flower. I could certainly show that one in or out of flower. That one in or out of flower. It needs a different pot, I'm not arguing that, but the tree is nice in its own right. That one would show in or out of flower. That one will show in or out of flower. To say you're only growing it for flower misses half the challenge with Satsuki. The art, to my mind, with a Satsuki is to grow a tree that flowers and looks nice while it's in flower, but equally looks nice when it's not in flower. Because otherwise I've got a tree that I'm growing for 52 weeks that I can show for a week. There's no mileage in that to my mind. Maybe I'm greedy and want too much. But and yes, I do make compromises. When you grow in Satsuki to show in flower, what you do is, if I was growing a maple, I'd grow the pad like that, and it would just have its natural curve to it. With a Satsuki, because I wanted to show flower, I will grow the pad so it leans to the front of the tree. It will be lower at the front of the pad than it is at the back of the pad. And the only reason for that is that when it's in flower, the flower shows better. But it's very subtle, it's not destroying the tree style, it's just making sure that when it is in flower, they show to their best advantage. I wouldn't you know, it's not outlandish that you couldn't show the tree because it was not in flower. I just think that's they're just nice as trees generally in green. And yes, most people grow them to show them while they're in flower, but most shows for Satsuki's we used to do at the end of May, beginning of June. How do I show these at the beginning of May, end of June, end of June, May, beginning of June? They're not going to be in flower for another 2 weeks probably, not properly in flower. By the time they're in flower, all the shows would have passed. Don't go tight with your wire, make sure it's strong enough to hold the tree. Don't cut 6 inches when you need 12 inches. All you do is end up cutting 2 pieces of wire and wasting one. There's always, I mean, it's not cheap, but it's cheaper to do it once and have a bit of spare than to have to do it twice because you were tight the first time. It used to be fairly normal to sit there and do butterflies to hold the tree into the bottom, the mesh into the bottom. I never quite understood why we wasted all that time. It looks really pretty. It looks really pretty, but do the roots really care? Because they're the only buggers that ever saw it. Tell me I'm a lazy sod, I'll agree. Your secret friend with Satsuki's is sphagnum moss. This is hanging basket sphagnum moss. Nothing special about it. The only thing special about it is it's been processed. It's been put in a food processor and chopped. We didn't have a food processor at home until we needed to chop sphagnum. And then we had to go out and buy one, and it burnt out the first one, so we had to buy a second one. When I repot a Satsuki that I want to make sure is really vigorous afterwards, I take a ball of the sphagnum and I put it into the root of the ball and push it into the ball. So that's the first bit. Now sphagnum's special because it's got anti-fungicides and things in it, and it's been used historically as a first aid dressing because of that. And it will release those in there. So that's the first bit. It's a natural one. It doesn't. Antibacterial. It could be that as well. There's all sorts in there. You're getting technical on me. It kills nasties and leaves the good things alone. I'm not a biologist.
They used it during the war.
Yeah, they used it in the First War as a wound dressing, so it's probably bacteria rather than. The second bit is that I use a sort of the kanuma, and I've cheated. This is pre-sifted. So this is all fine. And the really difficult bit is we put a bit of that in there. Now we just mix that in. And what that does is it gives it pockets of moisture. And the other thing, and we're talking at the break, anything organic in your mix will hold moisture and food. So it's always, with certain species, it's always good to have a bit of organic in there. It just buffers out the lean periods when it's a bit too dry or a bit too wet. And you can see that's changed to an orangey colour. When it's wet, it's really orange. What we'll do is positioning those in a place where it won't break too many branches to tighten them up. It's always a shame to break branches off that you want. Sorry. Sorry?
I say that tree's thinking, where's the butterflies?
And this is far from an ideal position to repot the tree, because if you have a square or a circle pot, the tree wants to be somewhere, and the Japanese will say off-centre. Crudely, if you think about proportions in Western terms, there's a golden third. So about a third back and a third left or right. It doesn't have to follow it exactly, it's just a target. There's lots of reasons why it works, but what's important is that you don't want it to be central in a pot if you're getting it ready to show. I've tampered with the roots quite aggressively now, and I need the roots to re-establish. If it weren't wired that firmly, every time the tree moves, the roots are going to damage and take a bit longer to re-establish because it's broken.
Because you're trying to develop the roots, would you not have put it in a slightly larger pot?
I don't want to do that because if you put it in too big a pot, the pot stays cold. It's a real fine balancing act. If I planted it in the ground, the roots would grow all even. But I don't have ground that I can do that in. If I put it in a pot, like that, they can grow all round. But that pot now has to get warm into the core of the pot before the tree starts to grow. So it might take me a little bit longer to do it in a smaller pot, but I think it will be quicker in the long run because the pot will get warmer and the roots will grow faster.
Do you think that with lots of other trees, species?
We've had lots of trouble where we've over-potted trees, where we put them into a big pot so they grow strong and healthy. As soon as we put them into the right size pot, whatever that might mean, but smaller pots generally, the tree's been much more vigorous. Might be that we because it's in a smaller pot, we water a bit more carefully. It might be psychological, it might be all sorts of things. Magnesium unlocks the calcium. The tree can then reabsorb iron and it goes green again. It's like a colour wheel. Magnesium unlocks calcium, calcium unlocks iron, and and the tree goes healthy again. There's, I'm going to say 200 to 300 trees in the garden. But some of them are that big. Some of them are bigger. But it keeps us out of mischief. Sometimes.
Whoa.
Is there any questions?
You always use the fine Kanuma.
I use different sized grains for different sized trees. For this, that's about the right size. For a bigger tree, I would have to sieve it, and I'd use grain size, same as you would with a normal tree. You use grain size according to the size of the tree. Bigger tree, bigger grain. But I would use the same grain all the way through.
All the way through.
Yeah, and don't suffer under the illusion that if you're using an English style mix that it doesn't need sieving. You have to get the fines out of all of your bonsai mix. Yeah. It's the fines in a bonsai mix that causes the problems, because that clogs up all the drainage. So whatever you're using, you need to sieve to get that free drainage through it.
Yeah, thank you.
Right, well, thank you very much, Paul, for a very enlightening evening and dispelling some of the myths about Satsuki Azalea. So, thank you very much.